So welcome to the monthly Wednesday free webinar, always the third Wednesday of each month, unless something spectacularly unavoidable happens. This one's going to be on sleep learning, something near and dear to my heart. And I realize I've done a couple on this type of a topic through the years, which I didn't really remember. I did a couple before that were similar, but this one's going to be different because every time I do a seminar, the reason I love these for myself is because it gives me a reason and an opportunity to do more research. And there's always so much more to all of these topics. And I like to give you a few little tidbits of places you can go to get more information. If a certain piece of this interests you, that you have some other resources or places you can go to do further study. Because again, when you get into the power of the mind, oh my goodness, it will never get boring, will it, Diane? It is such a powerful field that those of us that do this for a living, which all of us do pretty much. Well, Diane's you're kind of taking it easy these days, but you still do it every day. I know you do, because I know your mind is still working. So this is also a chapter meeting for the International Association of Counselors and Therapists. Let's get into what we're here for. Sleep learning. This is something, I don't know about all of you. I know all of us come from different backgrounds, and many of us come to this work because we started getting curious, as I did, about the power of the mind after we did something kind of accidentally or just without realizing that we were able to do it. And that's what happened with me. Some of you know my story. The main part of it, the big punch of it started literally was when I was 19 and I had a back injury that doctors wanted to send me down the road doing a bunch of surgeries, and just told me this horrible story about what my life was going to be like and all the things I was never going to be able to do, even with surgeries and all the horrible things. And something inside of me, that inner intelligence, told me to take a different route. That's all I'm going to say about that, other than it led me pretty quickly to zeroing in on hypnosis and NLP. And for the next 20 years, I ended up being in show business. I danced, I did bodybuilding, I did all kinds of things that I was never supposed to be able to do. Never had surgery, never had any kind of medication, never did any of the regular medicine. Now, I'm not saying anyone should do what I did, but I'm just saying that was what got me into this, because something inside of me just knew that there was a better way for me in that particular situation. And I'm sure some of you had that. So the thing I did in show business, the sleep learning awareness of that was possible, started in that field. I used to write songs. I would tell myself before I go to sleep to finish a song. I'd get stuck on it, get that writer's block. And I would go to sleep always with a pen and paper next to me, because I learned very early on when I started studying all this stuff that you can tell yourself, you can ask your mind to do something for you. And once you ask it in the right way and get out of the way, which we do when we sleep, your mind starts to process that direction, that request. And I say it all the time. Sometimes we don't even realize we forget to ask. We ask our mind for something, and if it's emotionally charged in a wonderful way, and the other side of it is, if it's healthy and good for us, for our health and well-being, then it's going to absolutely do everything it can while we're asleep and out of the way in order to see what's possible. And from my experience with myself and with clients through the almost 3 years now that I've been doing this, there's always more possible than what our human limited part of our conscious mind thinks. So once we get out of the way, if we just have a little bit of trust and patience and persistence, sometimes we can do things that everyone around us will be amazed and say that's impossible. And guess what? They can't say that anymore once we've done it. And so this is where my passion comes from. And I'm sure you all have stories. Someday I'm just going to do stories about what did you do with yourself using hypnosis, because we all can just sit for hours probably and talk about that. But that's when I started using it for that. I used it for memorizing lines. I did sleep learning for a show. I was hired to do a show at Sweet Fanny Adams Theater in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which just closed recently, I heard. And I got hired because the girl in the show got a job with an opera company, and she was the lead in the show. It was called The Life and Times of Millicent Sweetly, and she played Millicent Sweetly. And she was told, she announced she was leaving in 3 days. So they called me and got me in. I had 3 days to learn an entire original musical dance steps, staging, fast-paced British comic lines going between all the people on stage. It was crazy. It was all original stuff. So there's no way I could have done it. I learned all of the lines at sleep while I slept. And during the day, I would learn the songs and the dance steps and the staging and all that other stuff. But at night, I played a recording of the whole show with everybody's lines, including mine and the fast-paced stuff. And three days later, it was humanly impossible to do it, everybody said. 3 days later, opening night, I went on stage, and guess what? It was there. It was there. So I already had a great belief. And I did a paper during my degree program that I was working on during years after that. I did a paper on super learning. Now, that's an old book. I don't know if any of you ever saw this book. I've got an old paperback copy of it here. Super Learning, it's called. It's still a wonderful book if you're interested in these kinds of things. And this is from studies they did, I believe it was back in the 60s or 70s, probably the 70s, because that's when everything seemed to explode in these fields. And it's by Sheila Ostrander and Lynn Schroeder. And I will put that on the replay when I put this out on YouTube. It'll have that on there. So anyway, it says, have a super memory, remove business and sports performance. Improve business and sports performance, learn anything 2 to 10 times faster. I corroborate that. I think it's definitely closer to 10 times faster. So Super Learning is a great book, and I did a paper on it. And it talks about many things that we have the ability to do to help ourselves to learn more efficiently. So I compiled some new things that weren't on my other videos through the years that I did on things similar to this. And I would like to show you the bullet points on this. This is just a little handout that I will send to all of you. If I have your email addresses, you will get this. And this is kind of to get the discussion started and to really get us to realize this is science. And the really cool thing now compared to, many years ago, when I started this, is there's a lot more science and people are more aware that these things are possible. And mostly because we have the scanning, the brain scanning equipment to go ahead and see what's happening in the brain while people sleep, while people in hypnosis. And the two are different. When someone's in hypnosis, it isn't the same brainwave activity as sleep. There are some similarities, though, that we can actually use to our benefit and to the benefit of our clients. So what does the mind do while you're sleeping? Now, I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but I found this interesting. I found a bunch of things here. This isn't all that it does, of course, but the main thing that it does when we talk about learning, during the day, we get exposed to new ideas, new thoughts, new whatever, new material that we're studying, maybe. It does memory consolidation. And the short-term memory that our conscious mind takes in all day long, any of those things that are significant that we really want to remember. And of course, our mind is always listening to our thoughts. So it knows what's important to us just from what our thoughts were being exposed to it, or paying money and going to learn something or reading a book or whatever it was. So it turns those short-term memories into long-term ones while you sleep. And of course, that makes it so you actually can remember it later at some point, hopefully. And it actually, now this is the scientific part of it that's really exciting, that they've proven now. It does this by making changes in the actual structure and the function of the synapses. And that's the connection between the neurons. So all of these things we're going to talk about, you're going to see all the different sciences that are popping up that corroborate, in my opinion, what we've been doing for many, many centuries even, and that gives a better scientific foundation for when we want to talk about this or think about it in new ways. So It also while we sleep, it prioritizes short-term memories. Now, this is interesting to me. The very first thing the mind does in sleep, in order to process everything you learned or were exposed to that day, the first thing it's got to do is to deal with any short-term memory that has a negative emotional connection. So if you had somebody that insulted you that day, or if something happened, that was negative, that made you sad or that made you angry or any of those things, it first has to deal with those. If it hasn't already been processed on that conscious level, it's going to start trying to work on that, and it makes sense coming from, what all of you know with hypnosis, because we know that negative emotion, when it's in the body and on our mind, it's affecting the physical. So it's obviously going to interfere with sleep. So the first thing it's got to do is do that. And they talk about that it actually is silencing specific neurons for reset. So these neurons can be reset. They call it de-learning or clearing. The second thing it does, once it's taken care of those things, hopefully, is it takes in the new memories and it starts to integrate it with all of our stored information, right? Everything that's in our mind. Dr. Preston would call it the library in our mind, what's already there, all of our past experiences and learnings and things. And it starts to update the system. So it's integrating, you might say, all of the things that you learned that day that are relevant for you, and starts to compare and contrast and do all these things the mind does in order to incorporate it now into the system. And it talks about all of these things combined now with what you already had stored. The whole idea is that you get a deeper understanding, and you get, rather than just learning something and now I know how to do this or how to speak another language, or now I know about this subject, it actually gives a deeper learning that we call wisdom, because it starts to look at all of the other variables, the philosophy behind it, all of the values and the morals and all the things that combine at the unconscious level. Now, the other thing, while you sleep, the creative unconscious mind, as you know, it's a problem solver. It can come up with creative ideas about how to solve your life challenges. It's processing the learnings from that day, as we said, and it expands on your possibilities. Because again, the mind is always in a state of wanting to expand and grow and be healthy and move toward health. And that's this next thing. It facilitates physical and mental health. It works to extend your lifespan, literally. That's what your mind is wanting to do with what it does with these synapses and with how it's processing information. And that word that you're going to hear a lot during this, called consolidation. So here's from Cornell University. Key facts are that memory consolidation happens only during sleep. With specific neurons become reset. They get reset, literally. The hippocampus, CA2 region, I'm not a scientist, so if I said that wrong, sorry. It plays a key role in silencing neurons for reset. So it literally is quieting certain, it can make them stronger, or it can actually stifle them, make them weaker, if that's in line with what is going to be right for the system. The mechanism could be targeted to enhance memory or erase traumatic memories using hypnosis also, right? Because think about it, when we go into hypnosis, we know we go into those first couple stages of sleep. And when we're doing it intentionally with hypnosis, we have the same effect of activating that creative unconscious mind. So all of the things we're saying that happen in our sleep that people don't even realize is happening, we can do it intentionally with our clients and with ourselves using hypnosis. So there's 3 stages of learning and remembering new information. First, you have to acquire it, right? You get exposed to something. That's the short-term memory that's in consciousness that day as you go through your day. At night, when you fall asleep, then the consolidation happens. The unconscious mind consolidates all of this in the brain, starts firing off those synapses, again, all those things we already talked about, and it stabilizes the information. And then recall, of course, is the third step. Because if it's in there, but you can't access it, what good is it? Accessing the learned information. Acquisition and recall, that's what happens when you're awake. That happens in the conscious state. But the consolidation, the memory consolidation, the thing that puts it into the long-term memory is when you're sleeping. Now, you also can do it in hypnosis, which is the next part of this. So the neural connections, they help develop lasting memories and they become stronger. And then I just added this as well, you know, because as we know, a heightened state, because they always talk about in all the studies on sleep learning, you'll hear them talking about getting yourself into a relaxed state with heightened awareness or with more awareness. It's not about knocking yourself out. There's one of the websites I was researching on, it said it's a trance-like relaxed state that increases awareness. I was like, that sure does sound like hypnosis to me. As a matter of fact, when I explain it to clients, I like explaining it that way because it makes sense and it's a natural process. It's the way we're designed. So how nice that we can do it and make it even more powerful intentionally. So, and we can also, through hypnosis, which we're going to get into in a little bit, we can help the brain to actually make that consolidation process more efficient, stronger, more powerful, to get it to really treat those cells and to make them stronger if they're helpful to us, and to diminish them if the neurons are firing off things that are not healthy for our brain, for our body, for our mind. Cornell University, again, learning or experiencing new things activates neurons in the hippocampus. That's the region of the brain that's vital for memory, of course. And then while we sleep, the same neurons, this is important, the same neurons repeat the same pattern of activity, which is how the brain consolidates those memories and then stores them in the large area called the cortex. And, you know, we've talked in hypnosis through the years, hopefully you've heard this and had this, you've been exposed to this idea that whatever you're thinking of as you fall asleep, your mind takes off on. Whatever you're ruminating on or worrying about, if it's something like that, your mind is going to take off on those things and you're probably not going to have very good dreams or very sound sleep. But you also can go the opposite direction with that because these things work. You know, your unconscious works efficiently. Whatever direction you send it, it's going to have to do what it does and act on what your thought process is, the direction that you send it, the thoughts that you entertain in mind. So a new study in science says a hippocampal circuit mechanism to balance memory reactivation during sleep finds at certain times during, that's the name of the study, finds at certain times during sleep, deep sleep, certain parts of the hippocampus go silent, allowing those neurons to reset. So it actually goes silent to let this process happen. This mechanism could allow the brain to reuse those same neurons. So it resets them so that now they're available the next day to learn some new stuff. I think that is so cool. So it's malleable. It's constantly changing. And, you know, we talked in one of these webinars recently, or might have been, I guess it's in the medical hypnosis, we always cover neuroplasticity or brain plasticity. Here's that word again, synaptic plasticity. This is new. This is a new word for me. Not a new word, but a new combination of those words. And it makes sense, though, because synaptic plasticity is the reason why those neurons can be made stronger or they can be made weaker, and then they can be changed so that they can gather new information the next day. They are not static, in other words. That term refers to the changes in the strength. They can be adjusted, they can be regulated, all during sleep. And that's in the consolidation phase, again, of learning and storing those memories to make sure they're available as long-term memories. There's a gentleman I found that I wasn't familiar with before. And if you're interested in more study on this, this is, there's, again, a lot of stuff on the internet. There's a lot available these days. and you can find a lot of things. I like to, for these seminars, at least introduce you to something that I happened across that I think is, because you got to sort through a lot of junk to find the good stuff. And this is someone I think is worth more study for me. I know I'm going to be looking more into him. His name's Dr. Matthew Walker, professor of neuroscience and psychology, University of California at Berkeley, founder and director of the school's Center for Human Sleep Science. He's got a wealth of things out there. On the handout, I've got a video that I found of his. I didn't even have time to watch the whole thing. It is very extensive. So if you got a couple of 2 or 3, 4 hours, I don't even know how long it is. I listened to it. I was watching it for well over an hour. It wasn't even getting close to. Anyway, it's called Using Sleep to Improve Learning, Creativity, and Memory. And I've got the link there, or you can look it up through that title in case the link doesn't work when I send it to you. So that's somebody you might want to look into if you want to study this some more from a scientific standpoint. It's pretty cool. How can hypnotherapy help these processes? Because that's what we're here for, right? The learning state. You all know about the learning state. The learning state, you all have probably different ways of getting into that. It is literally what we've been talking about and what they talk about in a lot of these research papers that don't say the word hypnosis necessarily, but it's about your physical body being relaxed, your mind relaxing away some of the extraneous thoughts, and getting very, very, very aware. So focus, heightened awareness, heightened focus. And then I talk about going into the peripheral. That's one way to let go of some of that stuff, to just imagine getting your awareness outside of yourself. And in that state, it's called the learning state. This is something we can teach people who have to study for tests, to get into that state while they study, and then to get into it again when they're taking the test or the exam that they have to take. So the learning state is something we all can help our clients get into. It takes less than 5 minutes to teach it to somebody. We can demonstrate it and teach it to them in less than 5 minutes. So what an amazing gift to give your clients during that pre-talk. I may bring that up when I do that class as well. The learning state, it's been proven to enhance the ability to learn. Again, that's why we would teach it to someone who's studying, and to improve short-term memory. Because remember, when you go to sleep at night, if you have not been short-term, if your short-term memory hasn't been storing that information efficiently due to stress or due to the fact you didn't sleep well the night before or whatever, physical ailments, whatever it is, then when you go to sleep at night, it won't be accessible to do that reprocessing, to do that, all of that consolidation and that integrating it into long-term. So it's so important to be in a good state when you're learning something, in order to, again, have it available for that short-term memory to be efficient enough so that when you do go to sleep, that's the only time it can consolidate, remember, is when you're sleeping. So more efficient conscious process. Studies show that being well rested, again, I just said that, makes the information come in more easily. Taking a nap or doing a little hypnotic process right before you start to study, or right before you take a seminar, whether it's online or in person. If you want to retain more, go into the learning state, but rest before that. Make sure you're well rested. And also then afterwards, after you learn, within a couple of hours, studies show, if it's possible, that if you can decompress, and they say you can take a lot of them, like I said, they don't talk about hypnosis. They say if you can take a nap or get some sleep within 2 to 3 hours after learning something, then you will retain it better. It will integrate and you'll retain it and have recall better than if you stay up all night and do that cramming for the exam, which is the way a lot of schools get people to try to learn things. It's not very efficient. So again, if you don't have the luxury of going to sleep or taking a long nap, as we know, just 20 minutes or 10 minutes of hypnosis has the same effect. So we can teach people how to use those few minutes that they do have to decompress after learning something. They can just, if you're at the Hypno Expo, you're at a hypnosis conference, you just went to 5 seminars in a row and it's swimming around in your mind. Go in the bathroom, take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes. Just relax, decompress, go into the learning state, let your mind rest, and it'll already start sorting and storing that short-term memory more efficiently. It's very simple, very easy. Improve, of course, hypnosis can not only make the learning more efficient at the conscious level, like I said, when you're consciously learning, it also can improve the quality of your sleep, which allows then that decompression and the consolidation to happen more efficiently. So improving sleep, going into hypnosis improves sleep, right? That's one of the first things our clients will say after, no matter what they're coming for. If they're doing hypnosis, self-hypnosis, and if you're hypnotizing them and they're doing it, once in a while, they're going to start sleeping better. Practicing self-hypnosis because it releases stress, clears the mind, reduces discomfort if they have any, and it improves mental attitude, right? All of these things help you sleep better. So improves and thus improves the consolidation process for learning, long-term memory, and for the ability to recall. For more efficient unconscious processing. As we know, the hypnosis can help that unconscious part of the mind process things more efficiently. Again, they call it deep, relaxed state of focused awareness. That's hypnosis. We can enhance the ability to learn, to retain, again, to recall, both in the conscious state and then in the unconscious as well. I have a thing I developed during my working on my dissertation called psychoneuroregeneration. I've been doing that with clients and writing about it and doing seminars on it and everything for many, many years now. And it's something I came up with based on really what we're talking about today. And before I even knew some of the science behind all this stuff, because of what I had done, again, previously with myself. And I knew that before you go to sleep, you can literally ask your mind to do something for you while you're sleeping. So just before going to sleep, the PNR, I call it, psychoneuroregeneration, is giving yourself positive suggestions or affirmations just prior to sleep and designing them, of course, using hypnotic language that is, we know there's parameters on how you want to ask your mind for something, and using the proper language so that the unconscious knows what you're asking it to do. And you can enhance the natural unconscious processing during sleep. So, and again, that's going to process all night long. Whatever you left your mind with as you drifted off to sleep, that's what it's going to take off, and it's going to work all night long for you on those things. It's designed to increase the synaptic strength. See, now I know it's also doing that because of this research that's out now. So the psychoneuroregeneration increases synaptic strength and efficiency, the communication that tells the neurons whether to suppress, whether to be less or whether to be stronger, and to minimize any negative emotional interference to the process. So when I studied with Dr. Preston, who wrote the book Hypnosis, Medicine of the Mind, he was big on talking to your mind as you're falling asleep, right before you fall asleep, giving the mind direction, giving it a request. And it's something I heard many times from him, and it made sense, and I had used it before. So that's where all this comes from. And now they prove that it works. So a healthy processing of negative emotions. Of course, we know hypnosis, we do that with our clients and with ourselves all the time. So we can process those emotions from our day using hypnosis before we go to sleep and teach our clients to do that. And then we know that their unconscious mind won't remember. The first thing it does is it has to process any negative emotions that are still swimming around in there. So you want to get it processed in a healthy way as much as possible before you go to sleep, because so it can go right into that consolidation and storing those memories efficiently, working on the synapses, and get into that phase that's going to really help you retain those memories, those lessons that you learned. And that's the end of that. Any comments on that? That's just an overview of a bunch of stuff I found that corroborated what I have studied for many years. Some new words attached to it, some new ideas, some new research. So any comments or any ways that you all have used these kinds of things instinctively? Yeah, Ray.
Just a question. What about people who have substance abuse? How does this affect them? Any idea about that?
How does it affect them? Well, it works for anyone that, everybody's mind, these elements are all the same if they are currently using a substance, obviously, or if you know, do all of the things that are suggested, but you have, a bottle and a half of wine before you go to sleep, then there's going to be some interference. And, substances we know affect the function of the mind, especially what you're talking about, right? If they have an abusive substance, a problem with substance abuse, obviously it's going to affect the functions of the mind, conscious and unconscious. When I work with people with what they call addictions and what I call substance abuse, I get them to start doing these things and talking to them about, but you don't work with someone hopefully with hypnosis when they are under the effects of some kind of drug. Although these days, there's a caveat to that, because nowadays everybody that walks through the door or sees you online is probably taking several, prescribed medications. They are all mind altering. They all affect your ability to think in the way that your mind was designed to think. So obviously you got to take that into consideration. But having said that, of course, their mind still works the same way. And if they have trust in you, you've got rapport. And if they start using some of these techniques, you start teaching them the de-stressing, which of course will also help with helping them to get more in control in their conscious state of whatever the substance is, whatever their addiction is. If it's not a substance, because there's environmental addictions. People are addicted to their cell phones nowadays and all kinds of things where they literally almost go into withdrawals if they can't have it for a half a day or 2 hours, some people. Right? So, these are all considerations that no matter what we're doing with clients, but to know that we can, here's the important thing that I hope you get from this. If you haven't already worked a lot with sleep learning, I hope you'll get that you can really, really help yourself personally, and you can help yourself as the hypnotherapist wanting to help other people, or whatever you're calling yourself, someone who wants to help other people to help themselves, that you can really amplify it by incorporating sleep work, no matter what they're there for. So did that answer your question?
Yeah,
There's nothing that I wouldn't use it for, because I do
yeah.
incorporate this with every client, every single client, because it's part of it, and it makes your job easier. It makes their progress faster. It gets them more in control, and it
Hmm.
activates again. The more I read about, I want to read more and more now about all this after the last few days of studying it. Now we know during sleep, there's so much going on. There's so much activity that's happening. And I remember many, many years ago, I heard myself say, hypnosis makes you more self-aware. Are you all aware of that? I'm sure you are. Yeah.
Hmm.
And one day, I was in the field for many years. And one day I heard myself say something I'm sure I've said many times. I said, gosh, why do I have to sleep for 7 or 8 hours? What a waste. And my brain, that time that I said it or thought it, which like I said, I've probably done it many times, it kicked me from behind and said, hey, dummy. I had one of those. And it said, what do you mean waste of time? It's in there working every second that you're asleep, and you can use that. And then I said, that's right, because I have used it. And so all of a sudden, I became even more aware. I guess I must have been ready for that message. And I started really incorporating this more and more and more, because it isn't wasted time. It's actually very efficient time for your mind to do things that during the day, when you're busy and got all the thoughts and emotions and clutter coming in, it has to work harder to do some of these things that it can do much more easily when you just get out of the way. That's why hypnosis is so powerful, right? We get them out of the way. Just that we
Hmm.
relax them, which gives messages to all of those systems and the whole body saying, oh, everything's cool. I can just, you know, I can learn, I can grow, I can heal. Whatever the goal is, they can do it better when they're in that state. So why would you not use the sleep state as well? Yeah, right.
Have you had clients with sleep apnea? Because that's one of the fields I want to get into is clients with sleep apnea.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look at some of these websites on this. This guy that I mentioned, he's just one of them. There's many of them out there, but he's one that's very credible that I thought might be a good starting point if you haven't looked into the science behind
Mhm.
this. And each time you read an article by one of these people, of course, they've got 10 other references that now you can go down that rabbit hole or that one, and you'll find some really good stuff, but you want to start with somebody that's credible and that's in line with what you're looking for, because there's a lot of sleep stuff out there. It's not necessarily about what we're talking about using, for the hypnotic
Mhm.
processes for us to be able to help our clients better and ourselves. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
What else, Diane?
Yeah.
I see your wheels turning. You got something to throw in?
Um, it is so amazing what we can do when we put the power of the mind behind it. And I could just stop there. I mean, everything you said is spot on. And that whole key piece of relaxation with awareness, that 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 juxtaposition, putting those two together is so key. Now, I really do have a lot of background noise, so I'm going to try and mute pretty soon.
I can't hear it. Succinct, profound, and wonderful as always, Diane. Yeah, Jennifer.
I kind of had an aha moment because, when, a couple, for people who come in for sleep or for other things, and then they go, oh, I haven't slept well in this long, they've got anxiety. So that's another layer, of why they're, anxious or stressed because they're not sleeping. But also, what you were saying, when you were talking about the clearing and reset and negative emotions, I've always wondered about that. Why, when we're sleeping, you've got the kind of nasty voice in your head trying to process, like, and I guess during the day, we can click that voice off that's trying to process the conversation we had with someone, or why is that person like that, or why do I think that way? And it's interesting. I've always wondered why when I'm sleeping, and I know other people, we've discussed this, why that, kind of nasty voice is there. And, so obviously now I know I can have a conversation with it and go, yeah, this isn't the time or whatever. I can reframe it. But yeah, so that was my aha moment, that's why it needs to come up and it needs to process it so that it can catalog it and just, wherever
Nice.
you want to. Maybe it's asking that question, where do you want me to put this negativity, and how do you want me to, anyway. That was
And
my
again,
thought.
it doesn't necessarily mean that emotional impact of whatever it is that is coming up is going to be resolved completely in one night. That's not the implication. When you really, again, this is a 1 hour thing, so I couldn't go any more into it, but it makes sense because we know as hypnotherapists, the unconscious is the seat of emotions, they call it in a lot of the books. It is where it's our emotional part of our mind. So if there's something, and we know what negative emotions do to the body, to the systems, it's a stressor. It's a literal physical and emotional stressor. So when you fall asleep, if you're trying to fall asleep, of course, that's the first thing that has to be dealt with. That just made sense when I read that. I said, that is so obvious. I don't know why I hadn't thought about it like that. But yeah, that has to be the first thing the mind does before it can then look at all the stuff that you want to remember from that day, or that you wanted to take in and process and add to your archives of lessons and experiences and things like that, information. And so, yeah, and again, it may not get resolved, but it does. I'm going to bring this up just because of your question. One of the things that I was reading on a site about this was recommending, and again, these weren't usually about hypnosis, but they were recommending that before you go to sleep, because of that being the first thing the mind's going to has to deal with when you fall asleep. They said they recommend journaling your day to get it. And now a part of me, when I was reading that, said, no, I don't want that on my mind before I fall asleep, because then it's going to be the last thing on my mind. But that's not the way they meant it. And again, being a short seminar, I would love to get more deeply into that. So I might do one deep dive on sleep learning, because these are all nuances of it, right? You look at the surface, and I always talk about what's beneath that and what's behind that and what is that about. So when you get a few layers into it, it made sense to me, because it's about at least getting it in a place in your mind. If you journal it out, maybe not right before you go to sleep, but maybe after it happens, take a few minutes, go into a light state of relaxed, focused, state as much as possible, and sort through it a little bit. Sort through it from that place. Because when you're sorting through it from stress, as we know, that's not a good place to resolve things. That's not your creative mind helping you. When you if you can sort through it a little bit by journaling, or just getting it into a place where you are feeling a little better about it. And by the way, they don't recommend, if you're taking a class or something, and they say about repeating, they were talking about people that do the cramming for exams and things. They said the less, they did all these studies, there's a bunch of them out there, the least efficient ones are the ones where the person avoids sleeping and just keeps reviewing the material over and over and over and over. That's the least efficient way to retain the material and to store it properly. The best way is to go over it, and then about 2 hours later, go over it one more time, maybe with some rest in between, to review it. They say 2 times and 2 times only, and then get your sleep reprocessing, your consolidation going. Because if you keep cramming and cramming and cramming more in, the conscious part of the mind gets overloaded, literally overloaded, and then there's too much to sort through, and the stress builds up along with that. So all of these things, from our standpoint of what we know about how hypnosis helps people, it all makes sense, because you can't learn from a place of stress nearly as, you might be able to learn something, but it's not going to be nearly as efficient as if you, that's my anchor. I've used it for so long. I use it for everything. I get chills when I do it. I wasn't even doing it for anything in particular. I still get chills because it opens me up. And whatever I had in there, now I feel like I'm a little more focused, because I get in a hurry and I talk fast and I get kind of frantic. And yet that just does it. And I might have to do it 2 or 3 times if something really bothersome happens during the day. And I'm pretty sure that's why the sleep thing has been working for me and worked for me. And let me tell you something, 20 years in show business, it is kind of a stressful career. You never know where your next job's coming from, your next paycheck. You got to always be looking for the next job. And plus your, critiques and all the different things and the competition. It is extremely stressful. And yet I was healthier, I think, through those years than I ever was before. I know I was, than I ever was before that, because I was already learning how to diffuse it before it kept building up and building up and building up. And I went through some pretty horrendous things in my lifetime. And I look back, after I've been in hypnosis for all these years, I look back at things that happened before I even started studying this, like in my teens and my childhood even. And I go, what was it that got me through that without it being, like some of the people that come to see me that didn't have anything near that extreme happen, and they're, 30 years later still dealing with it. And what was it that processed? How did I process it? How did my mind body know to do that in a healthy way? I don't know where that came from. I honestly don't, but maybe it was just preparing me to do the hypnosis thing. So anybody else got something to add? We've got about maybe 4 or 5 more minutes. I'd love to hear from some more people. Ray?
Just one question. How do you deal with people who have nightmares?
Oh,
What is their psyche?
yeah, just like any other kind of sleep problems, just from what we've already talked about and what you guys already knew coming in here about hypnosis and how it helps. And, the first thing I would say is, well, what would cause nightmares, right? It's going to be a little different with each person, but it's some kind of trauma or worrying or fears that are in it's some kind of negative emotional response to something, either on a daily basis, maybe that's happening in their life, or it might be left over from something, those root causes that had the subsequent sensitizing events and all that stuff. That to me is the minutia, which we can get into in other areas of study and of course, as hypnotherapists, but to bring it to simple, I like to simplify things, especially when I only got an hour. People that have sleep problems or that have nightmares, there's some kind of really, nightmares usually come from some kind of fear base. Fear comes from worrying about something horrible is going to happen, right? Or it might be from an actual trauma, of course. And we know with hypnosis, whatever you're doing in the hypnotic process with those people, you just add this to it. Again, why leave out those precious sleep time hours, as we learn more and more about what the mind can do for that person while they're sleeping, incorporating that with what you all are already doing will only enhance it, will only make the results come faster and more profoundly and more positively. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yes.
So if someone's
Yes.
having nightmares, it comes from something that you're, whatever you're doing in the hypnotic state process with that person, you can extrapolate that down into creating some before going to sleep rituals for them to do. Every client I work with, I talk to them about, if they don't like the word affirmations, I'll say thoughts or images in your mind of something you love or of your goal, the positive outcome you're looking for. Let that be the last thing on your mind as you go to sleep. Take yourself out in the future and imagine enjoying having achieved this, just do a little future pacing. Anything that puts them in a positive state is going to relax them more and it's going to help them sleep better, right? Plus, then their mind might take off on that and show them even more that's possible for them. Because again, the unconscious has all that stored information. And the conscious mind is usually the part that's puts more limits on what we think we can do or what we think is possible. And I like those words, unlimited possibilities. And that's what the unconscious mind doesn't have, those limits. It can pretend and imagine. Plus, it has information about who you really are, what you really can do if you just get out of your own way and get rid of some of those fears and doubts and self-limiting, deprecating self-talk and all that stuff that just shuts down your creativity and your intelligence. So yeah, any sleep problems, I believe hypnosis is absolutely the best thing. Doesn't mean it's the only thing. And some people have to work on diet, substances, even caffeine, sugar, anything, everything affects everything. So some people, last thing they do, we had a neighbor who isn't around anymore, but when we moved in here, it was so cute because they were an older couple. And after my husband, who talked to them more because he was outside a lot, and he talked to the guy when he was mowing the lawn and everything, and found out every night they had a ritual, and it was ice cream every single night, right? Both of them. And they were both overweight. That was the visible part. The invisible part was he died of cancer at a not that old of an age, but there's different things that affect different things. And if someone's going through cancer treatment, talk about stress, and then that's going to affect their sleep, right? Everyone that comes to us can benefit by improved sleep. So these kinds of, if you can come up with your own little unique thing, I created mine for my dissertation because it sounded good, psychoneural regeneration. Sounds good, doesn't it? And I talk about, and partly that came out of listening again to Dr. Preston, and he triggered me remembering things I had done for myself through the years. But he talks about talking to your body and telling it, if someone has cancer, to send the army in, start killing off those cancer cells and flush them out of the body in a healthy way, send around the protector cells to protect my cells from the chemotherapy that I'm getting, send in the protectors, the guards, or whatever you want to call them. You can come up with all kinds of metaphors for it. You know what? We are finished with our hour.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate all of you. I hope you got something from that. Thank you all very much. See you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.